Good evening. You're either watching or listening to Redwood Wonk. I'm with Dr. Aaron Donaldson today, specially appearing, and my name is Eric Kirk, and we are discussing national political news of the day. We're going to start with the Harris campaign on fire. It's been kind of a discussion over the past few weeks, but there's some pundits are starting to wonder if this is a real turnaround in the campaign, or whether it's a sugar high that's going to die off, and that she will slip back down into the polls to where Biden was before. I don't think anybody's saying that, but that as to whether or not the boosts in the polls and her approval rating and the like are real, or lasting, or whether or not this is just going to be something that people are watching because it was so depressing a few weeks ago that any change in the campaign like this, where we don't have somebody who is basically coming apart at the seams, at running for the office, that there was just kind of an overjoy at the as to the change, and whether or not that will last, whether Harris will start to lose her luster as voters become more familiar with her, and same with Governor Walz. I'm going to try to pronounce that right. I keep saying waltz as in the dance, but it's actually Walz as in more than one, wall. And as to whether or not that is going to again, all of the excitement will die down, and we'll be back to where we were. I'm going to propose that I don't think we're going to go back to where we were, but I do think the euphoria will come to an end. But I don't know that. Obama in 2008, it just went on forever, and we haven't even gotten to the Democratic convention yet. That's next week. That's usually when they get their bump. But Trump didn't really get his bump because he was cheated, if you talk to him about it, by being taken out of the news when Biden pulled out of the race and handed it over to Kamala Harris. And it's just been one thing after another, and she's got these huge crowds that are, in fact, bigger than his crowds. She went to the Philadelphia crowd, to the Philadelphia auditorium. I forget what it's called, but he was in the same one, and there was nobody sitting in the upper seats, and she filled the whole thing. There have been accusations that these are fake, that people are being paid to attend these things, that they are CGI. That the unions are forcing people to go, their members to go, and they don't really want to be there, but they certainly put on a good act of wanting to be there. And the other one is that, well, they keep inviting these great musicians, and that's what people are really going for, is the free concert rather than to hear her talk. And that is what the opposition is saying, but it just doesn't seem to be the case. We're looking at the lines going for 6 blocks of people waiting to come in the middle of 90-degree heat and above, and so it is real. Is it based on just relief that we're not on a death march anymore as we were with Biden? There are a lot of ways to tackle this question, but again, maybe she's already gotten her bump, and the Democratic convention won't have any effect. Usually it happens because you choose your VP, but I don't know. There are going to be a lot of speeches by a lot of interesting people, and she does seem to have the youth vote in. She's climbed up in all the polls. She's even ahead beyond the margin of error in some of the swing states. The polls released today showed her actually ahead by a couple points in North Carolina. Same polling people have her down 5 points in Nevada. One of those has to be wrong, because I would expect her to do better in Nevada than in North Carolina. But I don't know. It's so different right now. She seems to be winning over the double haters, as they were called. There were people who didn't want to vote for either Biden or Trump. She seems to be getting like almost all of them, like something like 90% of them, which makes total sense actually when you think about it. But Trump actually lost ground in that poll. So much to talk about. Doctor Aaron, where do you want to go with it?
One of the takes that I think is interesting, I do think relief plays a huge part here. I think that people, obviously, the polling on Biden was bad and getting worse. The feeling that a major political party would look at what the voting populace is saying and listen is fairly antiquated, apparently, but it's one that a lot of people really need in today's politics when we feel like we're really kind of divided into various sides. At the very least, one of these sides is saying, you know what, we have to put a candidate forward that our voting public is going to be excited about, and that's what we got. But the two things that I think I would really point to when it comes to Harris's population that to me make it seem like it's not just a flash in the pan kind of thing is first, I'm going to do something I never do, which is quote Anthony Scaramucci. Oh boy, here goes. Okay. He said on the Bulwark, and I think this is important math, and I do think it checks out, that since 2016, 20 million baby boomers have died, and they're a huge part of Trump's base. And in the same time period, 40 million young people have become eligible to vote that weren't eligible to vote before. And the last time Trump won an election was 2016. And if you consider that about 60% of those young people are voting Democratic, that's the general take on that, those numbers are crushing for Donald Trump. And it shows how in a very short turnaround, you could see a ballooning of dissatisfaction with this individual. They ran him before and he lost. He was rejected as an incumbent and he was crushed in the popular vote the first time around. So I think a big part of it is just that these numbers are adding up and they don't add up in his favor and they do add up for Kamala Harris. The second one I really want to emphasize is this idea that Hillary Clinton lost an election that most people thought she was going to win. And I think that we can look at a lot of reasons why that happened. But very generally, when that happened, there was obviously a tremendous shock that went through a huge population in this country. And that was not forgotten. And lo and behold, it's the exact same person showing up again that they have to beat if they want to put the first woman in the White House. And in this case, it's, you know, the first Black woman, the first Pacific Island woman. It is a major historic moment. I think that we have slept on Kamala Harris. I have predicted her as a fast rising Democratic candidate for a very long time. I saw her as Biden's VP before he even declared that he was running for president. I think that you know, I've seen her ascending. Nobody was prepared for how prepared she is for this moment and how ready the demographic is, having lived through the legacy of seeing what happens when we don't show up enough. And I think that the knowledge is really sunk in that really was lost in 2016, that it's not enough to just have the numbers. We have to win specific demographics. Got to win Georgia, got to win Pennsylvania. Like the focus is really on those swing states now. And so all of that is really moving in Harris's favor. She is an extraordinarily qualified candidate when you look at just the positions that she's held, including current vice president of the United States. It's hard to argue that, you know, there's anyone more qualified currently. Donald Trump was president 4 years ago. That's, you know, the best he's got. So I think that it's not a flash in the pan thing at all. I do think that you will see some criticism, of course.
Right.
And it will really be interesting to me to see what happens, you know, if she wins, when she starts to govern, what her approval rating numbers do. That to me will be, if there's a slack, that's when we're going to see it. Until then, I would expect the wave to only continue to rise. It really feels like a kind of like flash Obama, like on steroids moment. Am I overstating that? Do you
Right.
feel the
No,
same way, or?
yeah, that it does have that feel to it. It's something new, probably also just because of the contrast of where we were a few weeks ago when, you know, half the Democratic Party was ready to commit suicide. I mean, it's it was really bad, but I think it's more than that too. One of the things I have to say is been really impressed with her campaign staying on message, not getting flustered by the attacks, partly because some of the attacks are just really stupid effing stupid. But they got the Switboat guy who managed to get John Kerry flustered by turning his military record against him, and he went talking to McCain, why aren't you putting an end to this, blah blah blah, and let it become a thing, denying it and the rest. And the Harris campaign and Walz specifically, they're not letting it get to them. They're like shrugging their shoulders and saying it was a misstatement when I said carrying a gun in war. I wasn't even talking about that really. I was talking about whether or not we need civilians to have these types of weapons, right? That was the whole context of it. He wasn't bragging about anything. It was just a statement. He said when I meant to say I carried in my military. Just one explanation. He doesn't say it over and over again. He just responded, and that's it. And
if I could, just importantly, he thanked J.D. Vance for his service in the same breath.
Yes.
In 2016, Michelle Obama said, "When they go low, we will go high." And that was a very bold statement, and I don't know that it worked. And now what they're doing is when they go low, because that's what Donald Trump will do, we're going to go around. They're just going to go around. They're going to keep doing what we normally do. The current brand that they have going is like affability. They're smiling, they're laughing, they're having fun.
Right.
Walz is exceptional at this. He is exceptional. And Kamala Harris does a great job of injecting joy into a very difficult and thankless job in a lot of cases. And so I think that in particular, that brand is very smart. And it's going to work really well for them with independents and swing voters and folks like that.
Yeah, and you notice they're shutting down the audiences when they say lock them up, and they're like saying, that's up to the courts. We're going to win in November.
It's basic, but that is what you're supposed to do. That takes us back to John McCain being like, don't say that about my opponent. Like, that is the way it's supposed to go, and I'm so glad that's what they're doing.
Right, and it's not like they aren't attacking. It's basically what the way they attack is just by like rolling their eyes at what Trump is saying and doing, and that's the other thing. Trump has gone way off message. I mean, I think with the shooting, he expected to just fly in. Everybody thought that photo was just going to be there, but as not the Harris campaign, but one of the surrogates said, being a victim of crime doesn't qualify you to be president. Brilliant. I mean, it's a shame that he's a victim. They keep saying victim and all of that, despite his fist pump and all of that. But Trump, they have not regained their footing. Trump has been out of the, not even campaigning for the past week, because he doesn't know what to say. And Vance, of course, as we've talked about, it's probably about the worst campaign. We talked about last week about the rumors that actually he wanted Burgum, but his sons berated him until he chose Vance, and he's probably pretty mad at his sons about now. But whereas Walz is somebody, I mean, and this is where I really got the feel that, okay, this is a sophisticated campaign, that her campaign is doing it, because they could have gone for Shapiro or Kelly. That would have been safe. It probably could have won with that. But to take him, somebody who was unknown, but what he does is his economic policies are very to the left of Bernie Sanders in some ways. I mean, he's really did, but he sells it. He sells it because, as Chuck Todd said, he speaks American. He translates it into a language that the average people can understand, and it's and relate to. So it wasn't even so much that he was a great pick that made me think that she's probably going to win. It was that her campaign was sophisticated enough to do that, when people like Chris Matthews brush him off saying, who is he, blah, blah, blah. He's too far to the left and the rest. The Trump campaign has been trying to attack him as a far left person, but they don't buy it. He's a hunter. He had that clip with his daughter at the fair where he says, let's go get some corn dogs. And she says, I'm a vegetarian, Dad. Well, then let's do turkey dogs. And she said, turkey is meat, Dad. And, he says, not in Minnesota, or the turkeys are special here. I mean, it's just the sense of humor and the personableness they're going to have a hard time coming up with that. They tried to attack him, but as has been pointed out, all the attacks on his military record do is remind everybody that he was 24 years in service. I mean, and then they're going to say he's a quitter, and then yeah, go ahead.
If I could interject just real quick, again, the word I really want is affable. And for those of you out there that don't know what it means that they're fun. It means that they're kind of cool to be around. I put my arms out to the sides and they go, come on. And Walls does that a lot. Like he puts his arms out a lot and he's like, what are we talking about? And his way of refocusing back with that kind of affability, the weirdo line is a good example of affability. Yeah. And Shapiro gives you all sorts of smart numbers, and that's the old smart way of thinking about politics.
Sounds like Obama.
Right, he really does. And geez, if we had time, I would love to just sit on that because I teach public speaking, and wow, Eric, wow, it's a cadence thing. But anyway, the point is that Walls comes off as he can plead, he can beg people. He's a coach. He knows how to be like, give me a little more. But as a good coach, he knows how to be like, we're all hurting. It's time to just put our arms around each other and realize sometimes we do our best and it doesn't work out. He can move past those kinds of wild assertions like him being radical and all these other things very, very well. He's a real surprise pick, and it's a very smart pick. And it's one that I do feel plays heavily towards this kind of joy tone. And if that does, in fact, destroy Donald Trump as much as I think it could, I'm going to be really grateful for that. And I think it's going to lead to a lot of people like me, people who study communication, returning to an important subject, which is how joy can overcome real malice and hate, because we need that right now.
Yeah, I mean, and just even that whole weird thing, it was just basically when he was presented with something strange that they said about him, his reaction was just to shrug and say, those people are weird. I mean, it was just, not immoral, not all the other heavy stuff. It's just, they're weird. I mean, it's
fine.
Anyway, we need to move on, but I don't think it's a sugar high. It will come down a bit because it just has to. Eventually, some of the attacks will have some impact, but I don't think enough. I think it's going to. I think the positive vibes are going to last into November, but we have to move on. So the politics of tax cuts. A very interesting thing happened is that Donald Trump proposed that we simply eliminate all taxes for tipping. And interesting thing came along is that Vice President Kamala Harris said, "Sure, yeah, let's stop taxes on tipping." This would be a very progressive tax cut. It saves. It's a big, huge contrast. And where this whole thing began was back when Ronald Reagan was president. He went on this tirade about how the waitresses of the country were ripping off the country and by not reporting their tips to all that. And so what he did was he imposed a sort of a mandatory tax that you pay whether you earn that much or less or more than that in your tips. And I mean, the idea though is that if we're going to have this system, which I think is a horrible system, in Europe tips are mandatory. You have to work it into the into the cost of the meal itself or whatever the service is. Just like a few restaurants are starting to do here, including one local one. There was a backlash against it, but I go there and they're doing really well, and I'm fine with the 18% tip. But tips. This is we it's a wrong way of looking at it, though. What we really need to be fighting for is a living wage for everybody, right? And they shouldn't have to be relied on whether we're going to voluntarily give them a tip or not. So many people who give tips, particularly when they're not, haven't ever waited before, seem to think of it as something that a favor that they're doing, a gift that they're giving, and that the waiter or waitress earns it by being nice to them and giving them good service. It has nothing to do with whether or not they have good service or anything. This is income that they're entitled to. These are working class people who have families to feed or debts to pay, and so it's goofy that they have to rely on tips anyway. But if they do, yes, if the free enterprise system is going to say, hey, this is between the server and the customer, then yeah, let's leave it out of the tax equation altogether. I don't think a lot of rich people like that, because this is there's going to be pressure on to increase the taxes on them if working class people are doing, and this could actually cost up to 250 billion over a few years. But I'm fine with that. Let's find it somewhere else. People who earn 500,000 or more, or a million or more, do like some states like California are doing, and tax people. And there's this thing about, well, rich people have such a burden. Why are they footing the burden? Because they get the most benefit out of the system. The system sets it up so they can make that money. They should be paying it all, really. They couldn't make that money without the government. To say, I mean, the real irony of economics is that capitalism depends on socialism to survive. Capitalism doesn't want to front the cost to build railroads and infrastructure and roads and even do research. They want the public to do that. And as Michael Harrington, former DSA leader and author, once said, he said, it's not even that we have socialism for the rich. We have the cost goes to the country, and the rich don't have any risk. They are socialized. That's it. We socialize the cost and we privatize the profit. We need to be cutting into that. Maybe go back to the levels they were in the 1950s. That wasn't a great left-wing time. McCarthyism, segregation, everything else. So go back to the 1950s at least. That would cover it, and then waiters and waitresses wouldn't have to pay these taxes. But I'm rambling on. I'm going to let you come in here.
I appreciate all of that context, and I think that it's all really important for people to keep in mind that tipping is a really weird practice. I mean, there's one level where you see like multi-millionaire movie star show up to a restaurant, and there's not nowhere to sit. So he slides a couple $100 to the person, and they magically find them a table. And right. I guess in this world where every American is like a temporarily embarrassed millionaire, then we kind of all like the idea that you got to earn my service here at Starbucks, otherwise you don't get your tip. And people come, visit us on campus from all over the world. We've hosted Irish folks for debating year after year. And to a person, they're shocked at the number and size of American flags that they see, and also just how important tipping is at so many transactional levels. And I think that you're right, that a living wage, that a tax practice that understands what it means to be at or near a contemporary notion of a poverty line is really important. And that's where the focus really should be. I think that when it comes to the politics of tax and things like that, is it the state of Louisiana where you have the energy companies that are suing the state because energy reduction cost them the opportunity to make a profit, and so now they're trying to like recuperate that profit somehow? It's like, just like you said, the benefit is assumed to go to large corporations and to wealthy individuals. And I'm looking in particularly at like 3.4 trillion in tax cuts that are set to expire that came about during the Trump administration, and in some part were extended during the Obama administration, going all the way back to W. And I think that when you look at those tax cuts, not as stimulating the economy or as generating jobs, because there's really, you're hard pressed to find evidence that they did either of that, but rather as like theft from the public, as like a driving factor in our national debt, that we just continue to want to pay for things like standardized roads and hopefully some basic notion of like public health care and things. If we want to pay for those things, then we have to like charge the people, as you said, that benefit the most from that. A millionaire, a billionaire, these are individuals that have generated an amount of wealth that may be lost on them, but to the rest of the world is defined as spectacular. And it didn't come from their just crass ingenuity and pluck and hard work. If that were true, there's a lot of folks that would be millionaires and billionaires. I
Yeah.
think that paying into America used to be, as you say, in the 1950s, a very patriotic thing. This, like the Republicans call the Democrats the party of tax and spend. But what's weird to me is the Republicans then are the party of order but don't pay. Like they want roads and they want like major public works projects and things like that. But then when the time comes to actually like authorize the taxes to pay for that, they like give handouts to their rich buddies. And the problem is more and more, especially with the Democrats through Clinton, both parties are in the same boat here. They become reliant on those kinds of contributions in order to exist. And so these tax cuts just go on indefinitely. And I think that's the real crime here, is that we find ourselves getting wrapped up talking about whether we should tax tipping. Whereas if we just taxed, like Tesla and Amazon and corporations like that for what they're actually worth, this would be like financially insignificant.
And I want to reemphasize this again. This is, of course, my left wing view of society, but really, government arose from a point in time in which from when we moved from hunter gatherer to the point where people had actually accumulated wealth in excess of what they needed to survive in any given moment. That's when wealth required a rudimentary form of government to protect it from whoever owned it within the given group or society, to protect it from other people in the society and to protect it from other societies. And I put forth to you that the sole purpose of all government policy is ultimately the creation and protection of that wealth. People say, well, what about welfare and redistributionist policies, that Keynes came up with in the New Deals of the 1930s? All of that. Keynes himself said this is about preserving capitalism. Those are
adding value. There's
right.
A way to add value. And the example that I always turn to is the Erie Canal. The Erie Canal is really expensive. That thing didn't come from nowhere, and it took
Right.
a long time and a lot of money. And there was no individual entity that could afford that. But once that thing was built, it made an empire out of the Northeast. Like it literally transformed economics to this day. And that's value added public works. And healthcare is that. Education is that. This can be proven.
It also is like what do you call it? A pressure gauge release to prevent revolution. Quite frankly, I mean, Keynes was upfront about that. I mean, it's just so anything, no matter what you're doing, it's about the protection, the the generation and protection of that wealth. And yeah, you bring that up, the railroads, all of it. None of it would happen without public investment. It is required.
And it adds values in ways that you can't really see. Like how do you quantify the value added to the Erie Canal? It doesn't come out in a future tax statement from the government. It comes through just an overall rise in productivity, in sustainability. As you say, infrastructure is a tremendous example. Energy infrastructure, sanitation infrastructure, none of that is cheap. And all of it is something that if we pool our public money and pay for it now, capitalism itself is going to flourish. It's just going to take off.
Yeah, I'll give you an example of where it's actually kind of visible. Commercial trucks cause about 70 to 80% of the damage and wear and tear on the roads. The truckers, the commercial trucking industry pays about 30% of the taxes. Which they say, well, it's more than proportion of the use, blah, blah, blah. We don't use 30% of the road. There are a lot more vehicles, but you're causing most of the damage. And there may be solid reasons for that. It may be that you want to spread that around more and have the general public pay it so that you can keep prices of food and everything else down. But let's at least admit that that's what it is, a subsidization of the commercial trucking industry. And let's call it that. It works out on a balance sheet just as if we were writing a check to them to subsidize it.
If we're going to subsidize the trucking industry in that capacity, then we need to subsidize every college student in that capacity, because it's the same kind of investment. And I feel like, again, there's this huge distinction. Weirdly, it's all going to come back to Citizens United, where you have like industries and corporations being treated as though they have the same kind of stake as a normal human person who's just trying to get by. And when it comes to the politics of taxes, in my opinion, I think trucking is essential. The bottom line has to add up, but stick it to them until every student and every parent and every elderly person and every person with a disability is tax-free. Then we stick it to every industry and every conglomerate that we can, because they get the most out of it.
No, that's right. And the fact of the matter is that capitalism couldn't exist without socialism. It depends on socialism to survive. And then the private industry isn't always the most efficient use. We really understand that. I mean, when we get to health insurance, for instance, I mean, whenever we're trying to get something like a public option or actual socialized medicine, they say, hey, we're the private sector. We can deliver much better. And then when you actually demand anything from them, they say, hey, we're trying to run a business here. We can't pay for all of that. So it's and the fact of the matter is Lieberman blocked. We didn't even get a public option in the healthcare plan, saying, well, no, we want the private sector. But if the public option would have just competed against the private sector, and it would have defeated the private sector. That's why they didn't want it. And it's an acknowledgement.
They can't buy out the public sector, and they can't compete against the public sector. There's an author named LeBeau that has a dated book at this point, but the arguments hold up. It's called Healthcare Meltdown. And in that book, he says that Americans spend twice what the Japanese do on their healthcare, and the Japanese go to the doctor 6 times as much as Americans do, and their outcomes are far better. There's so many examples. The CDC alone says that Americans would be 30% more productive each individual if we had national health care. And that's like a 30% boost to the whole economy. That's a huge number. And again, kind of like the Erie Canal, I don't know how you quantify that number, but that's value added. And that's why so many other countries on earth have made this a priority. It's also just humane. It is humane for a nation such as ours to look at corporations that say we cannot afford to sell drugs at this price and then watch people die. Like, that's inhumane.
Right.
And we should make more money and be a more humane group of people, in my opinion.
It would even lower the deficit. People that are obsessed with the deficit. It would lower the deficit. The Congress, whatever they call it, that does the analysis, budget analysis, they said it. They admitted it. It's
healthy
just because
people are value added. If you need to put it in such crass terms, healthy people add value. So
right. And also, a public health care system has an interest in preventive care.
That's the big one. Preventive care is a fraction of the cost of emergency care. And right now, in the parlance of Physicians for a National Health Program, we use the ER like a primary care unit, and that is tremendously profitable. It generates billions and trillions of dollars in profit, but what it does not do is help sick people get back on their feet.
And it's hard to profit off of preventive care, by the way. That's why it does not belong in the private sector. But we do have to move on. But I just want to emphasize, I'm all for giving wait people and people who earn tips a break. I'm all for that. But we need to really think deeper than that and broader than that. It's a piecemeal kind of one step way of everything. We need to have redistributive policies. But we're out of time on this, and we got to move on.
Make Nestle pay for the welfare of all public service workers in food. Sorry, go ahead.
Perfect. All right, our last topic, kind of a heavy one. Are we headed to World War III? Now, I'm going to start off by saying I don't think so, but there are concerns about it. Two areas to look. One is the threat of the attack from Iran and the threat of what will probably be the way overblown response to it. Is a big deal. Israel took out a commander in Iran and has violated their space a lot. So it's possible that there's going to be an escalation. I also, I don't think the escalation will last very long, but it is possible. The other area where there is an escalation is Ukraine, and I'm not blaming Ukraine. They've been invaded and trying to fight a war for 2.5 years now, trying to force the Russians out. And they saw a weakness, and they took advantage of it, and they invaded Russia, went into Kursk, which is region to the north of the Ukrainian border. And the Russian defense just completely fell apart, and it looks like they're going to have a hard time getting that back. And it seems like I'm not a military expert by any means, but it does seem like the intention was to draw forces from the Ukrainian front. Appears to have worked. Russia's pulling forces out of Kherson and one other region I can't even pronounce, and so it's. And it has completely upended Russian politics. They're freaking out. The Russian media is freaking out, seeing this as a NATO provocation and all of this stuff, which probably to a certain degree it is, because NATO probably had to sign off on it before Ukraine would use the weapons they're getting from the West to do this. But it's been very effective, and and there's even kind of a joke going around there. Well, why won't Russia just give up Kursk and I forget the name of the other two areas where they've invaded for peace, right? Because that's the pressure that's been put on Ukraine the whole time. But it's probably going to be a negotiating tip. The Ukrainians are locking in, but it's dangerous. It could escalate for one thing, because what will happen if Putin, who indeed is the autocratic leader of the country, feels that his back is up against the wall and that his power is threatened. If his power is threatened and he's ever comes out of office, he'll probably be jailed, maybe even executed. So can this lead to something more? But so far, he's been very reserved about making threats to the left. There's been the usual blustering and the rest party to the West. But it is an escalation, one that I'm surprised didn't happen earlier. But it is the war now is across borders, more than just drone attacks on air, forces and oil tankers and the rest. It's an actual occupation. Ukraine is now sending food in to feed the Russians in their occupied area. And they're stoking up a Russian rebellion, which has been around for about a year. But they are actually putting guns into hands of what could become a guerrilla force. It's it's a little scary. And we saw a fire in a nuclear power plant today. I don't know if that was intended as a reminder. I don't know what's going on. Actually, I think it was yesterday. But are we headed to World War III, Aaron?
So there's two situations at play, and those situations are basically predicated on two individuals. Benjamin Netanyahu is the kind of individual on the button when it comes to the immensely disproportionate and arguably genocidal response that Israel has decided to wage. The United States, as you probably know, just signed a $20 billion defense deal with Israel. It doesn't look like funding is going to slow them down. And that money, so far as I can tell, isn't predicated on any kind of particular cessation of violence or return to the negotiating table.
Right.
It was just $20 billion. And if I could just real quick dovetail with the last segment, let's tax Raytheon. Maybe if we taxed Raytheon as much as they were, because the
Sure.
defense industry in the United States, three particular companies, but overall the defense industry, Reuters is reporting, saw their income go up 16% last year, 16%. And that's where that money is coming from. So they give the money to Israel. Israel spends it on Raytheon munitions and Boeing munitions. And everybody apparently is happy, unless you, of course, live in Gaza. That war will go on until Netanyahu decides it will stop. And the response that Iran inevitably exacts for the bold assassinations of individuals across the Middle East, but in particular in their country, will determine how much escalation we will see. Whether it characterizes as a World War III event or not, I don't know how it spirals coalition wise, but I suppose it could. On the other hand, we've got Vladimir Putin, and in a very similar instance, we have an individual who basically has decided war is the way forward. And the United States is, sending a whole lot of money to Ukraine. We just,
Yeah.
that's a big question with the elections coming forward. Ukraine's invasion is a fascinating example of the ways that lives are lost for presumably narrative shifts. The most analysis I'm hearing is saying that Ukraine's trying to change the story. This is land that they plan to give up either in negotiation or when the Russian response inevitably comes, they're going to give this land back up. But they've made it harder for Putin to say it's a special security operation because now it's very clearly a war. You have an invading army on your own soil. That's a war.
Yes.
And that's a narrative shift that is foundational. It's like I hear people saying it's showing the West, showing the United States, showing NATO allies that they can, put up a fight. And so to me, both of those do not seem to be stopping anytime soon. How would they escalate? It would be up to those individuals to decide, how far they want to go. I think especially with Russia, you have a situation where everyone's just wondering what's next for Vladimir Putin. It's possible we could see the country shatter. It's possible that the guy could be there for another 10 years. I mean, there's really just no way to know without getting inside like his room because like he doesn't even trust his own intelligence people. I will say though that when it comes to the third instance that people were talking about, but then they weren't, is like China and Taiwan. I think a lot of people were kind of wringing their hands about that one. There was a really fascinating article in Bloomberg in January that said that like large numbers, like whole percentages of their rockets and missiles either had water for fuel or lids that don't work. And this is because of corruption in the Chinese military. And this traces to a lot of the people that she got rid of in the huge purge that we saw. And if those rockets don't work, it is impossible to invade Taiwan. And the idea that they would start a military problem there and then have whole percentage points of their rockets just not even fire is unacceptable. So I feel like at least that one for now, for the next couple of years, it's going to take to resolve that. We can put that to bed. But these other two are just in the hands of two people that we can't really control or predict. So it's really hard to know.
I'm actually have never been all that concerned about military operation aggression from China against the United States or even Taiwan. The reason being is they're the center of capitalism. I mean, it's like capitalism goes to them for cheap labor, unregulated, not having to worry about environmental and the rest. They are. I mean, it's ironic that they are. There was a story about it years ago where they talked about how businesses were leaving Taiwan to go to China to get away from unions and environmental regulations and work regulations, basically democracy. The article ended with both Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong are rolling in their graves, at the reversal. But so they've got investments all over the place. I think they've got so much of an advantage economically. I don't see that they need to advance militarily.
Do you think Iran has enough, ability weapons wise to facilitate the conflict with Russia? Obviously, selling a lot of drones, selling a lot of weaponry to Russia, one of the only major providers left. There's a couple more: North Korea, China, and also increase aggression to Israel. It's like they are weirdly the one country that's kind of like stuck in the middle. And if there were a coalition overlap that could see these things kind of come together, that would be where. I just don't like. They spend a lot on defense, but I don't think they have the ability to do both things. I think they have to decide, and at some point, that's probably at the expense of Russia.
I think what Iran's going to do is do some sort of token attack, something that shows that they are tough and are going to do something. They don't have any allies. The old anti-Israel coalition of Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, that doesn't exist anymore. Even Syria doesn't really care all that much about Israel anymore. They would like to get the Golan Heights back, but other than that, it's not that big of a deal for them. And Egypt and Jordan are anti-Iran. In fact, it's Saudi Arabia, for crying out loud. They're the ones that are about as brutal in Yemen as we are. So it's against Iranian-backed rebel forces. So I think they have to do something just because of the whole machismo of everything. They've got to do something to show that they're not going to take it. Right. And so it'll probably be a drone attack or something like that. They'll claim success. Everybody else will say it was a failure. Probably a few people will die. Then some people in Iran will die, or maybe they won't bother to attack Iran at that point. I don't know, or at least not in a meaningful way. So I don't think that's going to go anywhere because I think the Iranian leadership knows that it can't win a war against everybody in the region, even if the United States wasn't involved. I mean, it's not going to happen. And you're right; they've got a good thing going with Russia.
I'm arguably a little more concerned about Putin's response. Like, I feel like the invasion, especially that it's taken him so long, that it took him by surprise. Like, the Wagner thing ended the way that did. Putin eventually is going to do what he does, and I wouldn't put it past him to use this as a justification for like major retribution on major like cities, things like that. What do you think about that?
And that just depends on whether he's losing it, because in terms of, like, let's say he's going to use nuclear weapons, what does he have to gain by that? Okay, they look tough, but at this point, all bets are off, right? And so what do they have to gain from it? I think that they've got such tight control over the media in Russia. They're pretty much reporting that they're winning, that they're repelling the invaders and the rest. And the people who know it's not true are the same people who didn't believe them before. So I don't know that he is all that concerned about it. I don't think he personally cares all that much about the people who are suffering, that are caught in the middle. But he is a pragmatist. He's he is brutal. Without much empathy to the people he throws out windows and does everything else to. But the question is he crazy? Does he believe in an afterlife? All of that. I think he knows that he can't do that. I think there's a real likelihood that he does have to get the Ukrainians out of Russia. And if he's not able to do it with forcefully, he probably will have to negotiate something and then just call it a win.
I mean, that's the arguably Ukraine doing this because they feel like they might be close to a negotiating point. Russia's made no such overtures, but it's possible
Right,
that they know something the rest of us don't, and that they feel like that time is coming soon, and they can use this as a chip on the table. Just another example of the rhetorical benefits of war. If you're a soldier dying in these circumstances, that's pretty hard to justify. That'd be tough, but I think that when it comes to whether he's crazy or not, Julie Yaffa from Puck has just a ton of interviews out there and has spent a lot of time studying Putin. And her take is that he has a real old school USSR holistic approach of what Russia is supposed to be. And he
right,
sees himself as a unifier. And he demonstrated from the very beginning of this war that he is all in on trying to, quote, denazify Ukraine. And if the
right.
Nazis take any portion of your homeland, that is, I would think, wholly incompatible with that view of who he is and what's going to happen. I think that, he has used every apologetic he can to try to argue that Ukraine was a threat before the war started. And now he has a tremendous opportunity to say that, like, he's already saying the West is fighting us with Ukraine's hands. It's like NATO has invaded Russia. And
Yeah,
I think that him trying to cow the West, or at the very least to see, where their bluff point is, I don't think it would have to be a nuclear attack. I think it could just be a no holds barred ordnance attack on a major populated area or something. I think that there's lots of ways that
right.
that Putin could exact revenge in a real spectacular fashion that takes us back to, people forget the way that aerial bombardments worked in World War II. What's going on now is not nice at all, but the ways that, especially the United States, but also people like Russia and Germany,
Yeah,
would just carpet bomb whole regions. Like, we still have this capacity. We just
right.
don't typically draw upon it. So my concern is that he feels he's getting closer and closer to the edge, to the precipice, that he needs the biggest, boldest Russia when he goes out as possible. And he sees this as a justification. It's, I'm a pacifist. I don't believe in the war on either
Right.
side. I just think that this
Yeah.
is the way that he's going to respond to that.
It's very possible. I mean, before he invaded Ukraine, he had this big speech about Greater Russia, blaming Lenin for having lost Finland, for crying out loud, 100 years ago, and
Right.
and the collapse of that. And there is a Russian attitude that Ukraine doesn't exist as its own nationality or culture. It's Russian,
Right.
right? The language is very similar and all of that. But but there's two things that are in play, though, is that everybody, including Western experts, thought that the Ukrainian resistance would collapse within 5 days. It's been two
Right.
and a half years, and there's really just it's been like World War One, slow game, pushing back and forth, back and forth. This is the biggest break since then. But so Russia knows that its capacity is limited. They've got a vast army, but it's basically a tin pot dictatorship. They don't have the capacity. He's gotten rid of probably all of the best generals that he could have had, kind of like Stalin did in the Purge. That's why the Germans were so successful early on, because all of the really good people had were killed, were either purged or exiled, and so he doesn't. Oh yeah, he can kill a lot of people, but then what's the game after that? What is going? He's not making any progress in it. But what he does have is absolute control of the media in his country, and the narrative in his country. He can negotiate something that in the West we say, oh, that was it. He basically surrendered, but he can call it a win. That's the option he has, and enough people will believe him, that he can do that. So I'm not excluding that possibility. I just don't think that that's going to happen. But maybe I'm also wishful thinking. We'll see.
I'm going to say what I say almost every time I come on this show, Eric, which is I hope you're right.
Yeah, I do too.
Eeny, meeny, chili beanie, the spirits are about to speak.
Are they friendly spirits?
Friendly? Just listen.
This brings us to our predictions. Aaron, what do you have?
So everyone's asking Kamala Harris for her policies going forward. There's a real discrepancy. Donald Trump's policies are like, I'll tell you when I tell you, and when I tell you, I'm going to lie about it. but everybody wants her to come up with like some kind of policy. So she's going to give us a little raft of policies, obviously, probably by the convention. And my expectation is kind of a key rhetorical point of those policies will be focused on these tax cuts that are expiring, like 3.4 trillion. I think that they're going to focus on the ones that matter to like the middle class and to small businesses and things like that. And then they're going to stick Trump and Vance with defending the rest of those tax cuts. They're going to say our policy is exactly this. And if they want to have more, it's going to come off the rich buddies that Trump did last time. And that'll be generally the rhetorical point of their tax policy going forward, is that we're going to try tax cuts for the little guy and force that conversation onto Trump Vance on why we should give tax cuts to big donors and stuff like that. That's my prediction.
All right, my prediction is going back to our first segment as to whether or not this is going to peter out. I do think that her increases in the polls are going to lessen. I do not think she is going to win by a blowout. She will win the popular vote, as Trump has lost the popular vote in the past too. But because of the structure of the Electoral College and the demographics right now, I think it is going to be close. But I do not think that it's going to collapse, as she has shown discipline in her campaign, and she has an incredible team that is staying on message. If she stays on message, I think that the age issue is going to blow back right on to Trump. It already is. Megyn Kelly today actually said that he rambles and it might be age related. So I think she's going to do that. And once she does get into some of the policies, and she will propose policies that hopefully she sticks to one or two, like Evita said, why not give the people at least one or two things you promise? But I do think that the policy is going to be a very interesting rollout, and it will look progressive in all the ways that people that appeal to Americans. And I think that's why she chose Walz in particular. I think it's going to continue.
I could be over my skis, but sorry, September 10 could be a knockout blow going the other way. That's when they debate on ABC. That could be a big one for her.
Yeah, exactly. And the debate with Walz and Vance will be fun to watch. But
it's going to be amazing. Oh my gosh, can't wait. Debate coach is pumped for both of these debates.
So that is my prediction, that she's going to take a bit of a lead and hold on to that lead in November and win by moderate, about how Biden won before. We'll find out if I'm right or wrong. But until then, stay informed and stay engaged.